David Hopkinson asks, do you have a cutting guide or technique you would recommend for long angled cuts across plywood? Now, David, there are two ways we could do an angled cut in plywood. We could be cutting it like this across plywood, or we could be cutting it like that. I currently, up until now, have utilized the table saw for all such cuts. If you've ever seen me handle a larger piece of wood in this shop, it's tricky because the shop isn't big enough for giant pieces of wood. Everything here is 24 by 48 inches, 2 by 4 feet. Anything bigger than that, and I have to shuffle things around in this tile puzzle. Up until now, I've always used the table saw for better or worse. Certain types of long cuts, it can be a real pain in the ass, and angled cuts on the table saw without a guide can be like a nightmare. So for Christmas, I bought myself a Festool track saw. That was my Christmas present to myself. It is a beauty. Hold on, let me just get it and I'll show it. Look, this is an expensive solution to this problem. It comes with a 55-inch length of track. I bought the clamps for holding it down. It takes 2 Festool batteries, 1, 2, has all this wonderful precise depth measurement, lockout system, plus anti-splintering pieces. Yeah. We had some fine carpentry done in the ground floor of our house after we moved in. And the Japanese carpenter that was putting in these pieces of plywood had the Festool system for this. And he was like, look, these pieces of plywood cost hundreds of dollars a piece because of the rare veneers that they're covered in. And he's like, no San Francisco room in all of the city is actually square. So you can't actually make things in a shop and come in and just install them. You have to do the final finishing in situ. And when you're doing that, you don't have access to a table saw. You've got to use a track saw. And he said the Festool system, it just like, it pays for itself the first time you don't mess up a $400 piece of plywood. That was my Christmas present to myself this year. I know I could tell somebody else that that's what I want for Christmas, but I'm better at buying gifts for myself. Let's see here. I'm trying to see if there's anything. Jim Horton says, will you show us some tools you have made or modified for a job? I'm not going to go get the pieces because there's like 3 different places to go and I don't want to leave the screen blank for too long, but there's a certain type of threaded insert made of brass, which has internal threads that are the threading insert, either, 8, 10, quarter 20, etc. But they install using a flathead screwdriver. And just using a flathead screwdriver is a real pain in the ass with these because it's not self-aligning. You need a screwdriver that's got like a point in it. So I've done lots. I'll describe it. If the screwdriver tip is like this, you want this piece sticking out here to align into the threaded insert. So I have done lots. I have like 3 different screwdrivers of different sizes in which I have like carved out on a grinder wheel, the 2 sides. So I had an alignment pin. It's still not quite right. And frankly, I freaking hate those threaded inserts. So I use them as infrequently as I need to. But I do have like 3 different munged up screwdrivers for putting those in. Sorry, I don't have an example to show you right now. Let's see here. Chris Bruin says, there are plenty of makers in the world on tight budgets for materials. I hear you. As such, sometimes these makers, myself included, only have enough money to buy materials for the final piece. Beyond the typical measure twice, cut once kind of shop basics, do you have any tips or philosophies about getting a thing made right when you only have the materials that the final product will be made from, or only enough scraps for one test piece before doing the final piece? That is a tricky and really, really common situation. Yeah. I had this happen here. I'm trying to remember the build where I had to make some bends in aluminum. And I built a bending jig to bend the aluminum exactly to the specs that I wanted. And then I worked with where my markings were, so I knew that when I bent these two sides, they would be an exact distance apart. This is a tricky maneuver to do with a bender. And then between my test piece and my final piece, I used a different alloy of aluminum, and everything went to hell, because of course it did, because that different alloy of aluminum had a totally different ductility, a different bendability. It responded differently to my machine, and thus it didn't fit when I finished it. And I did not have another piece. I actually had to order more aluminum and wait like a week to continue that project. Sometimes you really do only have enough materials for the final thing. In that regard, time is always the default go-to where expertise is lacking. And by that I mean, if you're not sure how it's going to go, slow down. And if you're still not sure how it's going to go, slow down even further. And slow down even further than that. And like double check and ask yourself, if I did this and I boned it, what am I doing wrong right now? And maybe I should stop and come back and measure it again. And maybe I should stop and measure it again. Like, take your time and then back up and take a little more time and then back up again and take a little more time and space before you make that final cut. Ask yourself. And look, I should have known. This is only like 2 years ago I made this aluminum bending mistake. I know that different alloys of aluminum have different ductilities and different bending properties. I knew that deeply. I just hadn't been boned by that. And thus it wasn't part of my problem-solving brain until I screwed up. So one of the answers is go slow and take time. Another, Chris, is you got to screw up to know how not to screw up. Like, that is absolutely part of the process of being a maker. You can also ask other people for advice. You can also look at other videos of people doing that kind of stuff. Shop materials are a real thing. And when I was first starting out, that was the expensive thing. Going to the hardware store and buying $20 worth of plywood was not something that was feasible for me to do on any given day when I was 25. I was working on a much, much tighter budget. I remember coveting, I coveted tools that cost like, one example. I've always known how great these Knipex cutters are. But when I first saw them in Jamie's toolkit in 1994, I didn't buy a set for myself until the late 90s, because these were like $50, $60 a piece. And that was just more money than I was going to spend. Like, that's real. In those cases, I don't mean to say in those cases. I'm just iterating how much the budgetary constraints are when you're a young maker. So a lot of the early builds I would do for people who had almost no budget whatsoever. But I would say to the theater company or whoever was hiring me, listen, if you pay for the materials, I'll build the prop for free as long as I get it back when the show is over. And that was a great way of building some material backlog in my shop. What's behind me, all of that material storage, that takes a while to gather and to learn what pieces you want to save and what pieces you want to discard. And it's a process. The budgetary constraints you described are real. I hope that some of the philosophicalizing that I've done here is helpful in that regard. If anybody else has, one of the things that I've come to recently about my wood storage is I've become much less precious about the kind of wood I save. Like, I absolutely save pieces like this, but long, thin pieces, I've started to get rid of those. I started to put them in a take what you want bin over at Tested, and Kate and Jen and Norm and Joey and everyone has partaken of those bins. And over time, you develop the knowledge of what you need to save and what you don't. I mean, obviously, you want to save everything, but it's not possible. So it is all a compromise of circumstance. Dudes and dudettes, I love talking about this stuff. Thank you so much, Tested patrons, for your awesome question. If you'd like to support the channel more than just watching this live stream, which if you did, thank you so much, you can become a Tested patron, and how to do that is below. We do these live streams every couple of weeks or so. I love doing them. Next time, I think I'll build something at the beginning. This time, we just did a straight Q&A. I hope you guys all stay healthy and that the Omicron juggernaut does not affect you and your family. Stay safe, stay dry, stay warm, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support us even further, you can by becoming a tested member. Details are, of course, below, but it includes all sorts of perks, and we're building them all the time. You get advanced word and behind-the-scenes photos of some of our projects. Questions, you get to ask direct questions during my live streams, and we have some members-only videos, including the Adam real-time series of unbroken, unedited shots of me working here in the shop. They are weirdly meditative. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you on the next one.